So there's an old Sicilian proverb that goes like this: only a true friend will tell you when your face is dirty. I love that. So today I want to talk about friends. And I know, again, I talked about friendship really just a few weeks ago, but I guess the experience of social distancing and stay-at-home restrictions, if it's done nothing else for me, it's reawakened my appreciation of friends and the supreme importance of human connection. A connection that really goes beyond peering at someone through a computer screen or a smartphone. I am getting weary of that being how I primarily get together with people. The older I get, and hopefully the wiser I become, I am more certain of at least one thing. As unique as we all may be, all of us are naturally wired to connect with other people in meaningful ways. We connect with our families, the people we work with, or our neighbors, but it's in our friendships especially where we learn so much about ourselves and the world, and it's where we find joy. Our friendships matter so much because we choose who becomes our friends. So it's a voluntary thing. We invite and we create that bond of friendship. Aristotle broke friendship down into three broad categories. First, he said there are friendships of pleasure. For instance, you're a really good conversationalist, you're a lot of fun to go out with. Then there are friendships of utility. Now, with a utility friend, you receive some kind of tangible benefit by that friendship. And that might sound like a bit like exploitation, but it's really not. It's more finesse than that, and it really cuts both ways, and the friendship is very genuine. But the third and the highest form of friendship, according to Aristotle, is the friendship of virtue. This kind of friend shares your sense of ethics and values, and by your actions, you reassure each other that you are good and worthy individuals. Virtue friendships are deep. They last a long, long time. It's the kind of friend you share hardships with. It's the person who really has your back. They will travel alongside you on your journey, wherever that takes you. It's the person who's not afraid to tell you when your face is dirty. And through such a friend, we're given a way of seeing ourselves and the world around us, a view that we would not have otherwise. It is exactly what the 16th century English philosopher Francis Bacon meant when he said, "Friends hold a mirror up to each other. And through that mirror, they can see each other in ways that would not otherwise be accessible to them. And it is this mirroring that helps them improve themselves." So a virtue relationship of being a mirror to one another helps us become better, it enriches our lives, and it's basic to understanding the very meaning of life. Our need for that kind of friendship is so strong that in childhood especially, we might even have an imaginary friend. It's not a sign of psychosis, but it is someone who lives only in the reality of our mind. That's a friend who really knows you and who you can share anything with. You might remember the film Castaway, about a man played by Tom Hanks who's marooned on a remote island after his plane crashes in the South Pacific. There's no one else there. He's completely on his own for 4 long years. The most remarkable feature of the movie is the complete sense of isolation, the lack of human connection, and that's brought into sharp focus by one of the items that washes ashore from the plane's wreckage, a Wilson volleyball. Inadvertently, after accidentally cutting his hand and placing his bloody handprint on the volleyball, Tom realizes it vaguely resembles a human face. So, while it's still wet with his blood, he traces eyes, a nose, and a mouth on that handprint, and he names the volleyball Wilson. Over the years, Wilson becomes Tom's trusted companion. Wilson, as silent as he is Tom's only friend. He talks to Wilson. He takes great care of him. He argues with him. He shares his deepest thoughts and feelings with him. His one-sided discussions with this inanimate object make up practically all of the dialogue in the movie. But when Tom attempts to escape the island on a makeshift raft, Wilson is lost overboard and drifts away on the waves. Tom's grief at losing his friend, this volleyball that he's invested with so much emotional freight, is overwhelming. It's devastating. If you've ever seen the film, I would not be surprised if you cried along right with him during that scene. Now, on the surface of things, it sounds ridiculous that anyone would mourn the loss of a volleyball, even if it is an imaginary friend. But we still weep with him because we know on a gut level just how important that connection of friendship is, how essential friendships are to understanding ourselves and our place in the world. In the Bible, one friendship really stands out for me. So the story goes, in the Jewish city of Bethlehem, there lived a man named Elimelech. Elimelech was married to Naomi. They had 2 sons. A great famine struck Bethlehem, and none of the farmers could produce enough food, and Elimelech was no longer able to provide for his family, so he decided they would need to move to another city, a place called Moab. Now, Moab, that was foreign territory. To make things more sketchy here, Moabites and Jews had a long history of not getting along together. But there was not a famine in Moab, so that's where Elimelech went. After a few years, Elimelech died. In time, the 2 sons wound up marrying Moabite women. They were named Orpah and Ruth. So Naomi was taken care of by her sons and Orpah and Ruth. But then more tragedy struck. Not only had Elimelech died, but Naomi's sons both died too. When Naomi heard that the famine in Bethlehem was finally over, she decided that she really wanted to return home. So her daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, walked her toward Bethlehem. When they were almost there, Naomi turned to her daughters-in-law. She knew that as Moabites, they might not be welcomed in Bethlehem. So she blessed them for looking after her all those years and for having been good wives to her 2 sons. She praised them for being loyal. But then she said, you really ought to return home to your own families and your own people. Neither of these women wanted to leave Naomi, but Orpah did eventually turn back, and she went home to Moab, but not Ruth. She refused to leave Naomi. Ruth told her, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Nothing will ever separate us." So the 2 women returned to Naomi's hometown of Bethlehem. Such a beautiful story and so significant on many levels. Ruth and Naomi only knew each other initially because they were in-laws. They were not natural friends. They were foreigners to each other. They did not share the same religion or the same language. But what they had in common was that the circumstances of their lives were harsh. Naomi had been a refugee from famine, and both of their spouses had died. And in that long ago world, as single women, they could own no property. And to survive, they were dependent on the kindness of strangers. But they had each other. In a scary time, their devotion to each other was what pulled them through. It was a friendship of virtue. And because of what they had been through together and what they were still going through together into a very uncertain future, it was a friendship that empowered them to understand and navigate their shared journey in the world, wherever that might take them. And that is why Ruth and Naomi's friendship has been remembered and celebrated for thousands of years In each other, they experienced the presence and the devotion and the love of God. In November of 1985, a new syndicated comic strip appeared in newspapers created by an artist named Bill Watterson. It was called Calvin and Hobbes. It followed the daily life and adventures of a mischievous, smart, and creative 6-year-old boy named Calvin. Calvin's constant companion was a stuffed toy, a tiger named Hobbes. Now, to the eyes and ears of everyone else in Calvin's world, Hobbes was just that. He was just a stuffed toy, an inanimate object. But to Calvin, Hobbes was a living, breathing friend. In this comic strip, it struck an instant chord in readers. It clearly was not just about the shenanigans of a little kid and his make-believe friend. There was a lot more to it. Calvin and Hobbes, well, it was innocent enough for kids. It was really fun to look at, and children, including my own, loved the flights of fancy that it depicted. Calvin represented the range of human experience. He dared to be different. He challenged authority. He could be self-absorbed, but also very self-giving. He had moments of pure, unbridled joy at living, but many times he trudged through and he pondered the unfairness and the mundane things that number our days. Calvin really was a full-blown adult, depicted as a 6-year-old little boy. Hobbes served as his confidant, co-conspirator, debate partner, and most often the voice of reason. Hobbes was brutally honest but patient and kind in pointing things out whenever Calvin made a boneheaded mistake, which was pretty often. And when Calvin frequently took on the make-believe persona of a superhero in order to compensate for his limitations or the indignities and cruelty of the real world, Hobbes was always there, right beside him. And that's why a recurring theme in Calvin and Hobbes was the journey. A little red wagon, or in the wintertime, a sled or a toboggan, became a self-propelled vehicle for adventure. But more importantly, with Hobbes riding alongside, it served as a tool for discussion. Zooming together across the horizon, Calvin and Hobbes talked about anything and everything. Now, since that comic strip stopped publishing, it has become the subject of some really serious books, a documentary, and college courses. Not only because Calvin and Hobbes became a big cultural phenomenon, but more importantly, the questions it raised cut to the heart of how and why we are human. It was all about how we travel through life in good times and bad. So the primary message of Calvin and Hobbes is the kind of relationship that makes all those things possible in the first place. It's the trusting, loving bond between friends. It reminds us that friendship provides the way of seeing and understanding ourselves and the world. It provides a mirror to improve ourselves, to enrich our lives and understand the meaning of life. And that's why I think of Calvin and Hobbes as a kind of gospel message. The good news that we are never alone, and that even in a moment like this, when our friends may need to stand at a distance or be seen through an electronic screen, they're still with us. Last week, I talked to an old friend from Texas, 1,600 miles away. We had not talked in months. Time gets away from me like that. He and I had been through a lot together in the past dozen years or so. I was his pastor, but much more importantly, we were and we are dear friends. That conversation was a safe space to share anything and everything, and we did for almost 3 hours. We pointed out the dirt on each other's faces. And as we were hanging up, he told me he loved me. And I said I loved him. He will always be part of my journey. These days, we may not be together with friends in the ways that we would all prefer. But you know what? These days will pass. In the big scheme of God's love, And no matter what the future holds, we know who our friends are and where they are. They're in a community like this church, where we are surrounded and embraced by friends of virtue. Friends who will tell us when our faces are dirty, and they'll love us anyway. Friends who embody the presence and the devotion and the love of God, because they'll travel alongside us and they'll never leave us. And none of them are imaginary. They're very real. And side by side on this little red wagon that we call life, we will know ourselves and discover what our lives are about. And we will explore all of the places that God has in store for us.